Filming from one of the game rooms of the Game Preserve, my friendly local game store in beautiful Bloomington, Indiana. Today I want to tell you a little bit about progress, evolution of technology. This is a civilization game which is pretty simple in terms of rules and mechanics, and I definitely like that. I'm always a little scared of complex, headache-inducing civilization games. Recently I played another civilization game which is very much smaller than this one, and it's simpler and faster, but actually come to think of it, progress is not much more complicated. In this, I must say that the designers really did a good job in streamlining a lot of historical details, of interconnections between possible technologies. It's a card-driven game where the cards do a lot of the work for you. You still have to put the thinking and the strategy there, but you do not have to obsess about making that sub-rule work and making that technology work in a certain way and follow a different path of rules. The rules are as streamlined as they can be. You get a hand of cards that represent resources that you can develop, and you can use those as the resources that you actually develop, or you can use them as currency to pay for the resources that you're actually developing. So the resource cards can be both the goal, what you're developing, or the means to get there. Game plays up to 5, but interestingly enough, it also has a pretty solid solitaire version, and that is how I played the game, because I was fascinated by the idea of playing a solitaire game that was not a war game. War gamers play war games in solitaire mode all the time. Both solitaire games, that's pretty much the way you play them, but even non-solitaire games very often still pay off when you play them multiplayer solo by playing both sides at the best of your possibilities. Playing non-war games, shall I call it Eurogame? I don't know, but non-war games by yourself is usually excruciatingly boring. Luckily enough, here there is a good solo version, solo variant, and frankly, when a game works in multiplayer and also as a solo variant, to me that's a very welcome bonus, because it just means that I can play the game in more settings, I can play the game in more situations. So I'll tell you about the progress in general. I'll tell you about the solo variant. I'll share my impressions of playing the solo variant, but I think that in general you can get a pretty good sense of the gameplay if you're playing it with friends still. Each player in the game has a board such as this one to keep track of their progress in the various abilities that can be used during the game, and that will affect the way in which the player performs actions. You start with cubes on the leftmost side of each track, and then as you gain new abilities you move the cubes from slot to slot towards the right on the corresponding tracks. What I like is that the cubes are not simply sitting on this board here, but there are actual slots here so that the cubes sit in these slots, which makes it easier to move the thing around if you need it without losing the information that you had. If you inadvertently hit, bump into your board, again, you're not likely to lose your information, which to me shows that the designers knew what actually goes on in game nights. It didn't start from an abstract idea of game design. It's a great thing to have. Here we have a general scoring board which is placed in the middle of the table. You use this side if you're playing a multiplayer game, and then you place a cube of your color at the beginning of each track. You use the other side, and again you place cubes there if you're playing the solo version of the game. Then you have decks of technologies. In the standard game you have 3 decks such as this one, H1, H2, H3. You can also play with an expansion which gives you H4. You will not use all cards in all games. A number here indicates which cards you use in each game depending on the number of players. With a single player you have a smaller deck, with more players you have a larger deck. As for the abilities, let's go back there. Actually, that's kind of important. Looking at these skills here, This is the number of cards that you can have in your hand at the end of a turn. This is the number of cards that you can draw when you are taking the draw action. So you can draw 3 cards, 4 cards, 5 cards, depending on when you are in this track. But taking the draw action ends your turn, so it has to be the last action that you take in a turn. Reshuffle action, then it allows you to reshuffle 1, 2, or multiple discard piles into the corresponding deck, and then you can draw an equal number of cards. The quick draw, the 2 numbers on the quick draw track indicate the number of cards that you draw from a deck and then that you need to discard. Here I drew 3 and I need to discard 1. So often you will draw less cards with the quick action, with the quick draw, than with the main draw, but the quick draw doesn't end your turn. This is the number of actions that you have available during a turn. You start with 2 and try to get more, because having more actions is pretty sweet. These 2 stats refer to research. This is the number of technologies that you may be researching, you may have under development at any given time. You start with only 1, you may have multiple researches that are ongoing later in the game. And this is the number of counters that you place on the card indicating the research that you are pursuing. Suppose that I decided to research the wheel. Then you see there is a 4 there, then I place 4 of these counters there on that card, and at the beginning of each turn I remove 1, which means if I place a card on the development when my stat is there, it will take 4 turns for me to remove all of the tokens, and when I remove them all, the technology is active. I've actually finally figured out how to make a wheel. Hooray! Wheels are good. There are quicker way of developing technologies, getting technologies into play, but they are more expensive. This one is slower, but it's free, as long as you meet these 2 parameters. And again, you may develop your ability so that then you'll be able to place less tokens, which will allow you to develop free technology faster. As for the cards themselves, you have the technology cards. You get a hand of these cards at the beginning of the game. Again, you start with Age 1, Ancient Technologies, and you're trying to develop these. And on each card you see a list of the advantages that you gain from developing that technology. When you develop a technology, it means that the technology becomes active in your play area. This one will give you an advancement on that track. This one will give me an advancement in that track, an advancement in that victory track there, and a victory point at the end of the game. Different things, different technologies will give me different bonuses. Very important bonuses are these ones. These are tokens, resource tokens. There are 4 types of resource tokens. 1 for science, 1 for culture, 1 for technology, and 1 for general knowledge. This is sort of like a wild token that may count as any other type of token. Why do you need those? Because you need to develop technologies, you need to pay the cost. Technologies will have a cost written at the bottom of their card. There may be a single line, like you see here. For more complex technologies, it may be multiple lines, and you need to pay the cost associated to each line independently. Which means that for each line you had to pay 1 of the possible options. Sometimes you will want to simply pay the cost. I'll talk about these things later. You may just want to pay the cost. If you want to pay the cost, here you need to pay for technology tokens or any combination of technology tokens and general points that goes up to 4. And you can use this token here when you're spending. You flip it, then you will refresh it later. You may spend the tokens in your play area to pay for the costs of technologies. You may also discard cards from your hand. As you can see, cards have a value here, which is the general knowledge value. So suppose I want to develop this one, I need to spend 4, then I spend 1 technology, 1 general, and I discard 2 cards that are worth a general point of knowledge, or a single card that is worth 2. Then I've met the requirement, I paid for all of the costs of that card, which I've lost, and I can put it in my play area and gain the benefits from that card immediately. Now the card is active. However, technologies are related to one another according to a tree of technology. You have this player aid here, which is double-sided and will be your best friend and probably your worst enemy during the game. And that tells you how technology relates to one another, which technologies naturally lead to the next one. Which means when you have a line of cost that gives you a cost to pay, or has the name of another technology, the other technology is the prerequisite. And if you have the prerequisite, you can simply show that, and you do not have to pay the cost. So actually, for each line that you have, you can either pay the associated cost, or simply naturally come from the previous technology, and that allows you to develop the new one. For example, I can develop this one if I have masonry and agriculture, or if I have masonry and I pay the cost of the other line, or agriculture and I pay the cost of the other line, or I have neither and I pay the cost of both lines. When it is your turn, then you simply get to perform a number of actions, which is up to the number of actions that you have available, depending on that stat. And those actions can be to discover. When you discover a technology, you simply pay for the cost by spending resources and or showing prerequisites, and you put the card in your play area and you immediately gain the benefits associated with that card. So one action is to discover. The other action is to research, which is the action that I described earlier. You put a card in your play area for free, but you place a number of tokens on that card, and the card is not active, doesn't grant you benefits until all the tokens have been removed after a number of turns. You may draw up to the number indicated there, but that has to be the final action for your turn. You may quick draw as one of your actions, or you may shuffle and draw. These are the basic actions, pretty much discover, research, and then 3 ways of getting cards into your hand and 1 way of manipulating the deck and the discards. Once a certain number of cards with an age symbol have been developed, where are the age symbols when you need them? There you go. When a certain number of these cards have been developed, and the number of cards with this symbol depends on the number of players, then you unlock the next deck, the next age becomes available, and you continue like this, age after age, until you reach the 3rd age, when a certain amount of cards that show 4th age have been developed from cards from the 3rd age. In the center game, you don't actually play the 4th age, but that simply indicates the end of the game, and then you score points based on the technologies that you have, your position on this track, and other victory points associated with specific progress on this board here. Then you score points once the end of the game is triggered. The solitaire version has a simple but pretty effective twist. At the end of your turn, you simply have to discard a card from your from the draw deck. Remember, the deck will be much thinner than this one if you're playing solo. You discard it. If it is a card that does not have an age symbol, then you put it in a deck which is called the time deck. It's a deck face up. You must not mistake it for the discard pile. And if it has an age symbol, then you discard it and you keep drawing until you get a card that you can add to the time deck. If you cannot add new cards to the time deck, then you end the game in defeat. You have a defeat condition. It's not just, oh, play and see your score. No, you can actually lose the game, as you should do in solitaire games. which means that actually this really is the time deck. It's a countdown clock because the deck is going to be repleted. No matter how many times you shuffle the discard pile back in, the deck is going to be depleted, and you need therefore to race to start the next age before you end the game in defeat. So you have that momentum there, which forces you to keep moving. You can not just sit there and hoard the points and develop progress at your leisure. However, the cards that go in the time deck are not completely out of the game, because if you're playing the solitaire version, you have the option, the extra action of exchanging a card from your hand with a card in the time deck, because otherwise the time deck would simply remove cards from play, and that could be a little punitive. You may get stuck in a dead branch of the technology tree. Thanks to that option, the time deck still works as a countdown clock, but does not remove options from, not too many options from the options that are given to you by the draw pile. So in the solo game, you're trying to survive until the end of the game, to move through age to age before the time deck kills you. And if you manage to do so, at that point you score points based on your score on this board, based on your score from this board, based on technologies that you may have developed that give you victory points. But then you subtract points. You lose points based on the number of cards that you have in the time deck. So you really need to find a good balance between moving forward and developing technologies that allow you to move forward and also allow you to score victory points. Because if you survive until the end of the game, you've technically won, but if you won with a very low score, that's not a huge victory, not something to be too proud of. I got to tell you, I enjoyed this game quite a bit. I enjoyed it. The rules at the beginning seemed more complicated than they had to be. I had to read that manual, which is super short, a couple of times, and things weren't triggering entirely. Maybe it's my lack of familiarity with some of the ideas that probably, as a Civilization gamer, you have seen a zillion times. But once I set up the game and I started playing it, things flew very easily. The first time I was simply destroyed by the time deck. Again, I was playing the game in solitaire mode. Then I figured out that moving forward towards the next stage is pretty good, and of course the second game I made the opposite mistake, which is to move too fast and to get a completely ridiculously low score at the end of the game. So the solitaire game really has its own rewards and challenges. Finding that balance really is interesting, and something that worries me about non-war games that you play solo is that, well, maybe you'll develop a certain strategy that will always work. In this game, because of the randomness of the cards, you can develop general ideas, but you will not develop step by step always the same set of moves, because I doubt that that will work. And it is good how different technologies and connections of technologies will give you different bonuses. So from game to game you're getting different advantages and playing in different ways because of that, but also you're not too constricted. You always have the option of spending a lot of resources on getting that one technology which is completely outside of your branch of knowledge, but allows you to open up other things that maybe will converge later or will never converge, but give you good stuff that at the time you want. A lot of flexibility there, a lot of options there. The technology tree is a little scary to look at the beginning, but you just start from the bottom of the tree and you get a general sense. Also, if you're playing solitaire, you have less cards to deal with, so actually that's a good way of becoming familiar with at least some of the paths of the technology branch. And then maybe if you're playing multiplayer, you know those, you only have to learn the other ones. So playing solo is engaging per se, and I believe can be a great way of introducing yourself and familiarizing yourself with the general strategies of the game, not just with the rules. Theme is theme there. There was a little more theme than I expected. I thought that this game would feel pretty abstract, but actually the connection of the technologies felt right and felt interesting. I could see my bunch of people, that is the demigod of the game I was leading from the prehistory to the Renaissance, and then they become smarter and develop different things. And from game to game, you can develop different civilizations. Maybe a civilization which is no nonsense, technologically based. We barely know how to read, but we make good machines, and you can have the fancy Renaissance Italy. You can make Italy is Renaissance philosophers, music, art, opera, theater. They don't know much about anything else, but they're pretty happy. Just don't tell them they don't know about that stuff, and they're happy. And you can still win that way. So there is more theme than I expected. Playing solo, the game worked. It feels to me like it's one of these games that if you're playing with other people, you're still thinking about your own thing, you're still doing a lot of solo work. But I also can see, and this is an educated guess, if you played the game and I'm wrong, contradict me, that you can still mess up things for your opponent quite a bit by grabbing cards from the deck, by denying cards that you can see that they are looking for, technologies that they may want. And then you have to, of course, balance things, because maybe that technology you also need. That's great, so 2 birds with 1 stone, or maybe you don't need it at all. Then you have to figure out if it's worth to spend the resources to get the card, just so that the other player cannot develop that key element in their technology tree. So, civilization, light in terms of rules, which are really simple and streamlined, and I love that. Rewarding, not a filler, not a civilization filler like you have, for example, in Sail to India or Province, but a game that feels meaty, a game that feels right. Frankly, to me, it fills a niche of civilization games that I can actually play. Civilization games that are not too hard for me, don't give me a headache, don't take too long to play, take very little to set up, and if I decide to play it multiplayer, which I very may well in the future, I don't think it will take me too long to teach the game and to introduce the game to new players. The game probably will be slow the first time you play with new players, because they will do a lot of staring at that technology tree. But other than that, the game flows pretty well. I really like the card-driven engine of the game. Progress, evolution of technology, civilization game for gamers that do not necessarily are super hardcore gamers. But if you're a hardcore gamer, I think that you can still enjoy a lot of things that you will find in Progress.